You've seen the headlines, the grainy photos, the endless speculation. But you cannot possibly understand the reality of that place unless you've lived it. I have spent 15 years trying to forget the sound of the waves on that island. A sound most people find soothing, but for me, it's the soundtrack to a nightmare. I try to forget the specific shade of turquoise water, a color that fills vacation brochures but which my mind has permanently coded as the color of dread. For years, when people heard his name, they thought of money, mystery, and power. When I hear it, my body remembers. I remember being a teenager full of stupid, beautiful dreams. I remember the cloying smell of jet fuel and expensive perfume. And I can pinpoint the exact moment I realized I wasn't a guest, but a captive. This isn't just a story about the monstrous acts of one man. It's about the intricate, well-oiled machine he built to commit those acts. A machine with many moving parts. It's about the people who operated that machine, and the powerful, influential figures who knew it was running and chose to look the other way. This is the story of what really happened on that island. This is the story of how I finally, after years of suffocating silence, got my voice back. Before the island, before that infamous name was branded onto my memory like a hot iron, I was just a girl with a scrapbook full of dreams cut from magazines. I was someone. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, a life that makes you a keen observer of people, their tells, their desires. It also makes you a little too eager to please, to find your place, to be seen. My family wasn't poor, but there was a constant low-grade hum of financial anxiety. My father worked 2 jobs, my mother was always tired, and the phrase, "we can't afford that," was the backdrop to my childhood. I wanted to be a model or maybe an artist. Anything that felt bigger than my small-town life, anything that promised a world without that constant grinding worry. I was ambitious, but my ambition was entangled with a deep, teenage naivety. I believed in the fundamental goodness of people, that if you just worked hard enough, the world would eventually reward you. And that, I now know, was my greatest vulnerability. The approach wasn't some shadowy figure in a dark alley. It was brilliant, calculated, and came disguised as the opportunity of a lifetime. It happened in the most mundane of places. A shopping mall. I was 16 with my friends, laughing and feeling that fleeting sense of teenage freedom. A woman approached me. She wasn't just well-dressed. She was impeccable, exuding a kind of European sophistication I'd only ever seen in films. Her name, I'd later learn, was Ghislaine Maxwell. She had a charisma that was almost hypnotic, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. She didn't mention a man, or money, or an island. She talked about me. She asked about my dreams, my half-finished portfolio, my ambitions. She looked at me, really looked at me, and made me feel seen. That first meeting, which felt like a chance encounter, was the beginning of weeks of careful, methodical grooming. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. There were phone calls where she'd listen patiently for hours as I talked about my hopes, my fears, my family's money problems, tucking each vulnerability away for later use. There were lunches at expensive restaurants I couldn't have dreamed of affording, where she positioned herself as a mentor, a cool, older sister who had already conquered the world I so desperately wanted to enter. There were small, thoughtful gifts, a silk scarf, a rare art book, that made me feel special, chosen. The name Jeffrey Epstein was introduced slowly, almost casually. He was painted as a brilliant, misunderstood, an incredibly generous billionaire who took great joy in helping young, talented people get their start. He was a phantom, a powerful benefactor who existed only in the glowing stories she told. Ghislaine was the gatekeeper, the one who could grant access to this mythical figure. She made it clear that many people wanted his help, but he was very selective. He only invested in true, raw talent. The implication was clear. If he took an interest in me, it would be the ultimate validation. So, the invitation didn't feel like a threat. It was disguised as the culmination of all my dreams. Ghislaine mentioned a trip to his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a place she described as a retreat where influential artists, politicians, and scientists gathered. It was framed as an exclusive networking weekend, a chance to get my portfolio in front of people who could change my life overnight. The promises were tailored specifically to the vulnerabilities she had so carefully extracted from me. Introductions to top modeling agencies, a potential scholarship for art school, a way to help my family financially. It was a perfectly crafted script, and I was so desperate for the fantasy to be real that I didn't even realize I was being handed my lines. That little flicker of doubt, the quiet voice that whispers, "This is too good to be true," was easily extinguished by the sheer, overwhelming force of the world she was selling. It felt like my life was finally about to begin. The journey itself was part of the illusion, designed to overwhelm and disorient. It wasn't a commercial flight. It was a private jet, a customized Boeing 727. I later learned the media had given it a sick nickname, the Lolita Express. Inside, it wasn't set up for business. It was a lounge with plush seats and even a private bedroom. The flight attendants knew my name. I was handed a glass of champagne, even though I was underage. I felt like a movie star, completely seduced by the performance of wealth and importance. After we landed in St. Thomas, there was no taxi. A private helicopter was waiting on the tarmac to fly us the final leg to his island, Little St. James. With every step, with every new layer of luxury, I was being moved further away from my own world and deeper into his, a world where all the normal rules were about to disappear. The first time I saw Little St. James from the air, it was breathtaking. The water was a color you don't think is real, a swirling palette of turquoise and sapphire. The island was a curated paradise of swaying palm trees, manicured lawns, and perfect white-roofed buildings nestled into the green hills. The helicopter landed on a private helipad, and the air was warm and smelled of salt and flowers. But beneath the stunning beauty, there was an immediate, unsettling feeling of profound isolation. You are completely and utterly cut off. The only way on or off is his boat or his helicopter. That initial feeling of being impressed, it began to curdle almost immediately into a quiet, creeping dread. A sense that you had arrived in a place where normal rules and normal laws just didn't apply. The locals on the nearby islands had a name for it, a name whispered with fear and disgust: Pedophile Island. The abuse wasn't a single event. It was the entire environment. It was a complex, systematic machine of coercion and control, an enterprise built on power, secrecy, and the complicity of everyone present. Upon arrival, my phone and passport were taken from me. It was explained away as being for safekeeping, a casual precaution to prevent them from getting lost or damaged by the water. It was a simple, logical-sounding request that was, in reality, the first click of the lock on my cage. Your movements were controlled. Your contact with the outside world was severed. The staff, a mix of locals and transient workers, were bound by intense confidentiality agreements, trained to see nothing and say nothing. The entire operation, as the U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit would later lay bare, was a criminal enterprise of sex trafficking and abuse. My story, I've since learned with a bone-deep sorrow, isn't unique. It echoes what so many other girls and young women went through. It often started with something framed as innocent, even professional. A common tactic to blur boundaries and test compliance was a request for a massage. I was told Mr. Epstein had a sore back from his flight. I was led to a dedicated massage room in the main residential compound. Confused and deeply uncomfortable, I walked in, and he was there, lying on a table, waiting. Often another girl, just as young and scared as I was already in the room, creating this twisted sense of normalcy, as if this was just a strange but expected part of the deal. Sometimes Ghislaine would be there too, joking, directing the girls on what to do. Her presence designed to make it all feel like a bizarre but acceptable adult activity. Consent is a meaningless word in an environment like that. You are frozen by fear, by confusion, and by the crushing weight of the power imbalance. He preyed on financial vulnerabilities, promising to help with a family's medical bills or pay for school tuition, creating a sick, insidious sense of dependency and obligation. He weaponized your dreams against you. One survivor detailed in court how he used her own mother's brain scans as leverage, giving her a horrifying ultimatum: recruit more girls or he would stop helping her family. He made you believe he was your savior, all while he was the one systematically destroying you. This vile system was designed to turn victims into recruiters, a pyramid scheme of abuse. You were told that if you brought a friend from back home, you'd be rewarded, often with a few $100s. This tactic not only supplied a fresh stream of victims but also deepened your own sense of shame and complicity, making it exponentially harder to ever speak out. You weren't just a victim anymore. You were part of the machine. The island was a fortress, and we were the captives. The desperation was a physical presence, a constant ache in your chest. One 15-year-old girl was reportedly so desperate she tried to swim for it, attempting to reach the neighboring island of St. Thomas. She was caught by a search party, dragged right back, and her passport was confiscated as punishment. I remember hearing hushed whispers of that story among the other girls, and it extinguished any lingering hope I had of a simple escape. The psychological toll is almost impossible to describe. You begin to disassociate, to feel like you're watching your life from outside your own body, a movie happening to someone else. It's a survival mechanism your brain deploys when reality is too horrific to process. Shame becomes your constant companion, a heavy cloak you can never take off. You start to believe it's your fault, a thought that his and Ghislaine's every action and word was designed to cultivate. They made you feel chosen and special, so when the abuse began, you felt like you had done something wrong, that you had somehow squandered the incredible opportunity you'd been given. For me, the spark of escape wasn't some dramatic, cinematic moment. It was a slow, dawning horror. It was the point where the intricate web of lies just shattered under its own weight, the final, gut-wrenching realization that the man who claimed to be my mentor was in fact my captor. It was seeing the same dead, vacant look in another girl's eyes that I felt in my own, a girl who couldn't have been more than 14. Her name was Sarah, and seeing her stare at nothing, completely hollowed out, was like looking in a mirror. It was that moment the fear of staying, of becoming that, of disappearing completely, finally mercifully became greater than the fear of leaving. I knew if I didn't get out, I would just vanish. Another girl who came to the island and simply never went home. Escaping wasn't like the movies. There wasn't a climactic confrontation or a daring, visible act of rebellion. It was quiet, terrifying, and utterly uncertain. The island staff was a mix of long-term loyalists, completely beholden to him, and more transient workers who came and went. I had noticed one of the younger guys who worked on the supply boats. He was quiet, rarely made eye contact with anyone, but I had seen a flicker of something in his eyes once. Pity, maybe. It took me a full week to work up the courage, my heart pounding at the thought of what would happen if I chose wrong. I waited until I knew Epstein and Ghislaine were both off the island on a trip to New York. I found the young man near the docks as he was loading crates. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hide them in my pockets. I didn't explain everything. Couldn't. I just told him my mother was sick, that I'd gotten a call and I needed to get back to St. Thomas immediately. I was bracing myself for him to call security, for the whole nightmare to escalate. But he just looked at me for a long moment, then glanced around and gave a single sharp nod. He told me to be by the supply boat before dawn the next morning, and to bring nothing that would draw attention. He looked the other way. That one small act of human kindness, that one moment of turning a blind eye to the rules, saved my life. The entire boat ride across the channel to St. Thomas was agonizing. I was crouched down behind some crates, convinced that at any moment a helicopter would appear on the horizon, that I'd be spotted and dragged back. Every sound, the engine, a seabird, a wave hitting the hull, made me jump out of my skin. Freedom didn't feel real until my feet were on the public dock in St. Thomas. And even then, the feeling of being hunted, of being watched, lingered for years. The aftermath was its own kind of prison. I was physically free, but psychologically, I was still trapped on that island. The first few years were a suffocating blur of fear, paranoia, and confusion. I was eventually diagnosed with complex PTSD, severe anxiety, and a deep, corrosive distrust of everyone and everything. This is incredibly common for survivors of this kind of prolonged trauma. The psychological manipulation is so profound that you internalize the blame. You are terrified no one will believe you. You see his power, his influence, his photographs standing next to presidents and princes, and you think, who am I? Who would ever believe my word over his? So you stay silent. The silence eats you alive, but the thought of speaking is even more terrifying. The daily news cycle becomes a minefield. Seeing his face on a magazine cover or his name on a TV screen could trigger a full-blown panic attack, making me feel physically ill. You try to piece your life back together in the shadows, hoping you can outrun the memories, but they are always there, waiting. My personal journey to speaking out didn't begin with a burst of courage. It began quietly, with the bravery of others. It started when I saw the first few women telling their stories in the news. Their voices were a lifeline thrown into the dark, silent ocean where I was drowning. Hearing their accounts from Palm Beach, New York and New Mexico, so chillingly, hauntingly similar to my own, shattered the profound isolation that had defined my existence for over a decade. I realized I wasn't alone. We were, as one survivor so powerfully put it, a sisterhood of survival. Seeing them stand up, one by one, and then watching as the lawsuit from the U.S. Virgin Islands laid bare the entire criminal enterprise, it gave me the strength to even consider reclaiming my own story. It slowly transformed from a terrifying impossibility into a moral necessity, not just for my own healing, but for all the girls who were forever silenced and for those who couldn't continue the fight. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to the hundreds of girls and young women who were systematically manipulated, exploited, and silenced by an entire network of abuse. And while Jeffrey Epstein is gone, the system of power, wealth, and influence that enabled and protected him for decades still exists. The fight for real justice and accountability for all of his co-conspirators and enablers, the recruiters, the financiers, the powerful friends who partied on that island and looked away, is far from over. If you are a survivor of sexual abuse in any form, please, hear me. You are not alone, and it was not your fault. Healing is not a straight line, but it is possible, and your voice has immense power. Organizations like RAINN, the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network, offer free, confidential support and resources 24/7. You can call their national hotline at 800-656-HOPE or find them online at rain.org. Reaching out is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of incredible strength. For everyone else watching, the most important thing you can do is listen to survivors, believe them, and support them. Demand accountability from our justice system, from corporations, and from the powerful people who create and maintain the systems that protect abusers. Don't let this story, and the stories of countless others, fade away into just another shocking headline. Share this, talk about it, and join the chorus demanding justice. It is by standing together, by refusing to be silent, that we dismantle these intricate systems of abuse piece by piece, and ensure that this can never happen again. For years I felt like my name, my very identity, was stolen from me on that island. Today I'm taking it back.